Hey folks, Brian Bledsoe once again here for Red Summit Rangeland Insurance. It's time to talk about some long-range forecast information once again, and this is video number 2 of our 3-video installment that we are going to be doing for you so far this season. And the thing that I'm really focused on going forward is just like the last video, the La Nina episode, and we have some analog years in here for you to help you kind of plan forward for how we're going to finish this year and as we head toward 2022. We'll talk more about that here in just a moment. First of all, drought monitor, obviously rough going here across all the western United States, California, Nevada, up through Washington and Oregon included. A little bit of hope here starting to take shape across western Washington, parts of western Oregon as we had some storm systems start to move in, but we have a long ways to go in that regard. And really, to be honest with you, most areas west of the Mississippi have been in pretty rough shape in terms of drought. So we need some moisture around here. For a lot of us, we're not going to get it. For some of us, there are some encouraging things starting to show up. Let's go to the next slide here and show you what the precipitation percentage of normal has been over the past 60 days. The browns, the reds, and the whites, obviously, where we have a major deficit. No surprises there across southern Nevada and virtually all of California. But we've also had some encouraging signs taking place out here in the northern plains where we've had a surplus. Southwest Arizona and most of Arizona did okay with the monsoon season. So there are some good things here and there. But as I indicated earlier, a long way to go here in the western U.S. Even some drought starting to show back up across parts of Colorado, New Mexico, and down into the southern plains. Let's go to the next slide, and it'll show you what we're doing in terms of the La Nina here, in terms of our computer model forecast. All of those lines are different computer models looking at the same thing. Are we going to have an El Nino, neutral conditions, or go all the way toward La Nina? And most of these models are down here in La Nina territory. The next update on this model suite comes in about, say, 6-7 days, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these computer models actually coming in stronger with this upcoming La Nina event. So something to be mindful of here, but also we've had good consistency in forecasting this now off and on really for the past several months. So no huge changes there. Let's go to the next slide, which focuses on our potential analog years here. Okay, an analog year is basically a year in the past with similar conditions globally in terms of ocean temperatures, La Nina, El Nino, and different cool and warm pockets across the world's oceans in terms of ocean temperatures. And then you look at that in the past and you see where we are right now, and you try to match up those years accordingly. We've talked about this in the past, and right now the broad suite of analog years goes November, December, 2005, 8, 10, 11, 13, 17, and 20. So again, I'm breaking this down in 2-month intervals here in terms of what we could forecast going forward. So that's where we start. You see where the dry bullseyes are down here in the yellows, the oranges, and the reds. That includes the Pacific Northwest, California, and down here across the southern tier of the country. Everybody else white or slightly greenish blue, which means average to maybe above average. That's the general schematic here in terms of what the analog years have produced for November and December, or how we'll finish this year. Let's go to the next slide. This just simply rolls over the calendar year to January and February. Again, so 06, 09, 11, 12, 14, 18, and 21. And you see that dry signal gets pretty stout here across California and across the southern tier of the United States, while it lessens quite a bit up across parts of the Pacific Northwest and northern Rockies, where you actually turn out to be a little bit wetter than average. Let's go to the next slide. This is for March and April. You see that wetter than average signal setting up out in the west, the drier than average signal setting up in the southern and western high plains, a little wetter than average here across the far south and southeast, but a whole lot of white everywhere else, where you're looking at basically just average precipitation over that time scale. All right, now what happens when we hone that analog year package down just a little bit and include 2013, 2017, and 2021? In many cases, those years resemble where we are more closely. And again, this still has a little bit of time to change here, but you can see what happens when we do that. The wetter than average signal shows up here where it's been showing up here recently and continues across the northern Rockies, and the drier than average signal sets up shop here again, where we obviously don't want it. California, the desert Southwest, and out here into much of the southern and central plain states, where drier than average conditions have also been waxing and waning now over the past several months. So again, that's what happens when we pair that analog year set down just a little bit. What I actually think will probably happen is the Pacific Northwest will probably do okay, and then we'll see drier than average conditions big time across most of California, especially the southern 2/3, and then that signal spills out here into the southern plains. So not too different than what we're looking at right now, but a little different here and there, if you get my drift. And we'll kind of focus on that a little more going forward. Let's go to the next slide, which focuses on temperature with that analog year set. And you see the warmer than average pocket out here in the west and the southwest, and really the cooler than average pockets setting up here across the eastern 2/3 of the United States, where they might actually have some winter weather for a change up across the Great Lakes and the upper Midwest. We've already seen some pretty cold air pooling up across parts of Alaska and northwest Canada, so eventually some of that has to come down, and there are some signals within the computer models that some of that could take place, especially in December and then again in February. So that's the way things stack right now as far as the analog year set is concerned. Let's focus in on the model data, and we'll start with the NMME model set right here for November. And you can see nothing really to take away from this other than what we've talked about with wetter than average stuff here across parts of the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rockies, drier than average conditions down here where we would likely see it across southern parts of California, out into the Southwest, and across the southern tier of the United States. Again, that's November. Let's go to December, and you can see those two signals really start to intensify. Wetter than average north, drier than average south is the way this particular model sees it for the month of December. Let's go to January. It's the same story. In fact, the wetter than average signal really takes hold here across parts of the Pacific Northwest and Northern Rockies, western Montana, Idaho, western Wyoming, even snaking its way down here into western Colorado, while that drier than average signal spills out from California across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Let's go to February. And that dry signal broadens quite a bit here across California and Nevada. The wet stuff stays the same pretty much across the northern tier of the country. Again, that is for February. Let's look at March. And March, it's the same story. No big surprises here once it's locked in. However, I will say this, as we head towards springtime, most of the computer model information really starts to weaken this La Nina event and make it go away. I'm not totally convinced it's going to go away for before we get to springtime, but there's a shot at that, because what this model projects for April is the dry area expanding farther north, and that would obviously be a bad thing. Folks up here over the northern tier had drought conditions last year. It would really be a downer if they broke a lot of that during the winter and then it came right back in the spring, but this is not a good sign in any way, shape, or form across the western United States. And again, I know this is several months in advance, but it's something that we're watching. Next slide still shows the same thing for May, where you get drier than average conditions out here across parts of California, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, West Texas, the same old song and dance, given the way the deck has been stacked as far as the weather's concerned off and on over the past several months. The next model, the Euro seasonal model right here. So again, this is for November, and you see the wetter than average signal up here across northern California, Pacific Northwest, parts of the northern Rockies, drier south. We're going to go through these fairly quickly because they're not going to say a whole lot of difference here versus the NMME. So if we go to December, let's look at that. Again, wetter than average, northern California, out there in the northwest, northern plains seeing the same thing. That's for the month of December. We go into January, we shut the door here across a large part of California the way this model sees it, and keep it wet just like the NMME was doing across the northern tier of the country, and drier the farther south you go in typical La Nina fashion. February, the same story. That dry signal gets very stout across most of California, Arizona spilling out into the plains. The wetter than average stuff stays out here in the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys. Let's go to March. March, the same story. You see how closely the Euro seasonal and the NMME are mocking each other here. They're on board with the same type of pattern and continuing that pattern. Again, that's a look at March. Let's go to April. Continuing even through April, even expanding that dry signal farther north, just like the NMME did. So when you see both models latching onto that type of signal, and both of them looking at the same thing, and the analog years kind of showing the same thing, you kind of have to really start honing in on what those conditions could possibly be like when you have that much consistency among the analog set and among the model suite. Those two models in particular. We go to one more model here. This is the IRI multi-model probability forecast. It has the stoutest dry signal a little farther to the south across the southwest part of the United States for November, December, and January. And then for January, February, March, they do expand it a little bit farther to the north here. But in general, has the same idea as those previous model sets. And that's, I said, is important when you're looking for some consistency here going forward over the next several months. Let's look at the regional drought outlook. Again, this is for the Pac Northwest. Drought is relaxed a little bit here for parts of Washington and Oregon, but remains much worse farther east. Storm track, as I said, should get increasingly active for this area, and I would expect drought conditions to really start to improve, especially as we get deeper into November and December, as some of those bigger Pacific storms start to roll in. Let's go to the next region, California, Nevada. Again, drought continues to be a major issue. I'm most concerned about the southern 2/3 of the state remaining in a pretty significant drought. Again, that doesn't mean that you won't have storms move through. It just means that the storm frequency will be greatly reduced compared to what it usually would be during the wet season here across the western United States. So, and even drought removal for northern areas isn't a complete done deal at this point. We need to get a lot of help here with the storm track before we can really start talking about sustained relief. And the west, adding a few more states in here, Montana, Idaho, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. The overall thinking isn't a great deal different here with what I've talked about. Montana and Idaho obviously in the best shape as far as the way the pattern may set up to see the most sustained and significant drought relief with the way that storm track could potentially set up. Next slide, into the plains, same story. The farther south you go, you're going to struggle a bit. The farther north you go, up across the northern plains, that's probably where you're going to have the better drought relief. We've already seen some of that take place now over the past, say, month or so with some bigger storms coming out of eastern Montana and up into parts of the Dakotas, and we're seeing that trend continue right now. And then farther south, the southern plains, I would expect drought creep to continue to intensify. And while most areas here are in pretty good shape, I would expect drier than average conditions to really take hold here and drought creep to materialize as we head over the next several months or so. As far as this forecast is concerned, folks, I don't see a great deal changing over the next several days and probably even a couple of weeks. But as I wrap this up for you, I basically want to convey the message to you that there are certain areas that are going to get better here pretty quickly, and other areas that are probably going to struggle. And the way the deck is stacked right now, I hope I've kind of laid that out for you, at least for my thoughts through the month of October. I'll be back in November with another set of model data and also really honing down those analog years to hopefully get us a little bit more accurate forecasts going forward. Thank you very much for checking me out today. If you have any questions, be sure to have Steve or Sean drop you an email and send that email to me, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Have yourself a great night.